The Annual Report Awards were created by a group of businessmen led by the late Stan Owen in 1950. They are still very relevant today in benchmarking annual reports. In the late 90s, I suggested to them that they include an additional award for communication excellence in annual reporting. As part of the criteria, we asked all the entries to include their objectives. We got over 300 entries, and it was very clear from those 300 entries that very few of the entrants had any clear idea of what their communication objectives were. The first annual report that I produced was about 100 years ago, and that year it was judged the best annual report in Australia. I hasten to say that didn't have anything to do with any of my input, but it was judged the best annual report in Australia, and it was only 24 pages. Then in stepped the well-meaning regulators, and they said, 24? Why don't we make it 100? 100's better than 24. And then they said, after a while, let's make it 200. 200's better than 100. And so it went on and on, until finally, what happened?
I don't want your report.
What did you say?
I don't want your report.
Oh. What'll we do now? I know. Let's get the government to bring in legislation where shareholders have got to opt in to get an annual report. That's brilliant. We're going to save a fortune because they've already said they don't want it. So what have we got now? Is that progress? I don't think so, because what's happened is that instead of all the shareholders getting a 24-page annual report, we've got 10% of the shareholders getting a 200-page report that most of them don't understand, and the other 90% not getting anything. The shareholders said they didn't want the annual report, but what they really meant was that they didn't want the annual report in that form. When we were designing the first few reports for the AMP held focus groups to ensure that they got the information in the report correct. And in those focus groups, they had the highly sophisticated to the highly unsophisticated. And while they had a range of opinions, there was one common opinion that went right across both groups. Give us an easy read. Mark Twain made the statement when he said, having lost sight of our objectives, we redoubled our efforts. What we have now is a situation of information overload. And information overload is the best way known to man of reducing readership and reducing comprehension. Now let's look at the letter O. To me, this represents the status quo, where you go around in circles and get nowhere. That's what's happening with many reports because their starting point is last year's report. Okay, let's break one side of the O and we have broken the status quo. By adding this tail, we've indicated we have broken the status quo and intend making progress in another direction. Now we have the letter Q. It's the letter Q I want you to focus on today because Q means question. And I believe that true progress can never be made unless you question existing practice. Let's get back to basics. And what are the basics? The objective of an annual report is and always was to provide information to shareholders in a form that they can understand so they can make an informed decision in their investment. Many reports have lost their way, and as a result, they are largely a cost without any real benefit. There are two types of mindsets that are needed. Vertical thinking, you start from a known point and follow a well-defined path to always reach defined objectives. Effective communications requires lateral thinking. George Bernard Shaw summed up lateral thinking when he said, most people look at things that are and ask why. I dream of things that never were and ask why not. When producing a report, many people get obsessed with the words. The art of writing for a report is telling a story with as few words as you can, not as many words as you can. The messages are far more important than the words. And often those messages can come through without any words at all, by a single image, or sometimes even the presentation and the quality of the report itself can send out very strong messages. Every time there is an introduction of new technology, there is a rush to embrace the new and discard the old. We saw it with television, we saw it with the web. Each time the pendulum swims wildly in one direction but comes back to a centre point when people realise that it's not the panacea. The ideal situation is a blend of old and new. It works and it works well. The internet is the pull medium and print is the push medium. In fact, I'm told that 70% of all Google sales can be traced back to print. We call it the marriage of fiberspace and cyberspace. We live in very exciting times. When I first started in this industry, I had one option, and that was print. As the years rolled by, the options expanded, and with it the potential expanded. The right way of making the best use of the media is to mix the media and have the right media for what you're trying to do. But the word of advice that I'd give to everyone in this room is don't judge the media on what you've seen in samples of what it's done. Judge it on the potential of what it has to offer. For instance, if you took a full-page advertisement in the Sydney Morning Herald and didn't put an advertisement in it, you can't say that press advertising doesn't work. And the same applies to the media. So let's look at the media now. And the mix that we're suggesting is a fourfold mix. First, you've got the formal printed report. Now, that has got to be in print, and that is going to be an ever-diminishing circulation the more legal it becomes. Our suggestions are that you actually dumb it down, not spend a lot of money on it, because the formal annual report is now basically a report to legislators. It's a legal document. It's there to protect your back. It's there to tick all the boxes. So don't spend too much money on it because it's going to get a decreasing readership. The opt-ins are already down below 8%, I believe, and they're going to diminish the more you dumb it down. And that's good because the other media to be used without the regulations applying to them are going to be far more effective. But that cannot and must never be viewed as your only report. Because if you put that out as representative of the company, it'll look as though you're going bad, and that'll be self-fulfilling, believe me. When you look at online, what online does, print gives you a line in the sand. That tells you what the situation is at a particular time. What online gives you, it gives you the opportunity of continuous reporting. But it's got to be used correctly. As I said before, it's a pull medium. But I'll go into that a little bit later. Now, I have seen a lot of online reports, but I've never, ever seen a good one. So what we've done is we've taken the liberty of actually producing a demonstration site of what we believe the ideal annual report should look like. As I say, it's a demonstration site. It's not for anyone in particular. It's showing what we believe the online report should look like.
Armstrong Q presents Q Generation, the annual report for people on the move. Let's take a closer look. Your easy access to the report. All the pages are animated. At any time, you can return to the contents. Chapters can also be accessed simply by sliding. When you find the chapter you require, you can scroll down to read the contents. Let's hear from the Chief Executive.
Obviously there are pressures from all sides. At least if people understand the true story, then that's the most appropriate thing. So shareholder communication, stakeholder communication becomes increasingly important as we go through these difficult times.
The videos can be paused at any time. The divisional reports can be accessed by touching these buttons. Let's look at the Glades. This is something you can't do in print. You can enlarge the photos. Or, if you prefer, see the whole catalogue in miniature. At any time, you can revert. Roll up to see the full Glade story. Type you can easily read off screen without printing. Or, if you prefer, the page can be read to you.
The Glades Residences is right in the heart of everything the Gold Coast has to offer.
As the dialogue continues, the page will automatically change to match the voice.
And service the major regional Robina town.
The voice can be turned off at any time. Some pages contain videos.
Dare to dream of new horizons. Dare to reach for the stars.
The financials. You can read off screen and scroll type. See graphs of key figures. You also have direct access to the notes. You can interact with the company. And they will interact with you. Introducing the directors. Check their profiles. And breaking news ensures you always have access to the latest information in real time, direct from the company itself. Q Generation interacts with print and online in a unique system called Q View. And it comes to you from Armstrong Q, when you want solutions beyond design. Armstrong Q, beyond design.
In the early days of electronic media, you had one option, and that was a fixed computer on a desk. Over a period of time, in recent years, you've got other options. You've got the iPad, you've got the mobile phone, you've got the portable computer. The one thing that you should be very wary of when you're briefing your designer is insist whatever design they do, it's responsive design. In other words, you design it once, and it works across all media. Now I'll just give you a demonstration of this CELMAT report of what responsive design is. Now this is a pretty basic design you see on most companies' website. This is how it would look on a desktop, now the iPad, the mobile phone. There are 4 parts to a successful package. 1, the report to the regulators. 2, your online report. 3, your mobile report. But number 1, 2 and 3 are not going to get you to the required spread of the people you want to talk to. You need another medium that is going to get you to everyone. All your stakeholders, your shareholders, your customers, government, the community, every one of your stakeholders. And I believe that that should be done in a radical new print design. I don't care what you call it, but it cannot be called report, it can't be called review, because as soon as people see those words on anything, they've got a fixed impression of what it is. Each one can be called a different thing for a different company, and it can be an effective name. And we make sure that there's no regulation over that, because if that starts as a 32-page document, you start putting regulation on it, you're going to finish up a 200-page useless document again. And that's where we started on this whole conversation. We need a device that is actually going to take you to your whole potential audience. And I believe that the best way of doing this is through a corporate book, an annual corporate book. So what's in this magical corporate book that is going to consolidate shareholder loyalty? And why is it going to do it? As I said, let's get back to basics. What the stakeholders want is information in a form that they can understand so that they can make a value judgment on their investment. And that's exactly what this corporate book is going to do. And people make their judgment on companies by what they read in the newspaper and what they hear on the media. I'm told that there is an increasing number of people who are actually buying shares online. And of those, a disconcerting number of people are working without financial advice. The result of this is that people are actually buying shares in companies they really don't know.
I don't know you. I don't know your company. I don't know what your company stands for. I don't know your company's products. I don't know your company's performance. Now, I really don't need this.
So the spreads that could go in this corporate book, and it is flexible, but they must be one message per spread. Who we are. A lot of people don't even know who the company is, who they really are. What do? They don't know what they do. What are they trying to achieve? In other words, what's the objectives of the directors? What strategy is in place to reach those objectives? How have those objectives worked in the last year? In other words, how has the strategy worked in meeting the objectives? Then you'll have one page of number and statistics, and that's all. The Americans call this form the numberless report. A very important page, where do we go to from here? Because people are more interested in where you're going than where you came from. Then we go into the situation is, who are the directors and why are they in that position? In other words, what are they contributing to the company? Who is making it all work? In other words, who are the managers who are making the strategy work? Then you go into situations like, what investments have we made? Now, people talk about investments, but it's normally one-sided. They say we've spent 350 odd million on buying a new A380. But they should put the whole thing into balance and to get impact. Now, as I said, we have one message per spread. You've got a headline, you've got a photo, and you've got a small amount of text. And if people want to find out more, there is a reference to the website. Let's take the example of the investment. This is how it could look. There's the head, there's the photo to support the head, and there's the copy. The whole thing is an integrated thing, and you get one message very quickly on that particular spread. Then we go into the issues. You're in business. Every company, every industry have got issues. And the best way of working this is to say, what is the issue? What are we doing about it? What is the likely outcome? And what is the timeline? And so the spreads go on. They can be anything that you want them to be, but there should be a message per spread.
I know you. I know your company. I know what your company stands for. I know your company products. I know your company performance. Now, what have you got for me?
You may remember I was talking earlier about obligation and opportunity. Addressing the issue of the opportunity, and also going back to the observation that we made on those people who submitted entries for the communication awards, and there didn't seem to be any clear communication objective. I'd like to address the subject of the communication objective. Now, it seems to be pointless to me if you're producing anything if you don't have a desired outcome. And there's no difference to anything that you send out to your shareholders. Now, the whole idea of sending something out is to motivate people to take a certain course of action. So what we always propose is at the start of any one of these exercises, we address the subject of what would you like to motivate people to do? And that becomes your starting point. So what you need to do to motivate someone to do something, you've got to leave them with a subliminal message. Now, I say subliminal message because there must be a distinction between a direct message and a subliminal message. If you were to say you were the best accountant in the world, people would say, he's made a claim, he's the best accountant in the world. But it'd be far more effective if through your actions, they came to the conclusion that you were the best accountant in the world. Then it would have validity. I call that motivation by subliminal research. So the audience has listened to what you said, they've formed the conclusion, and in their mind, you are the best accountant in the world. Now, the same applies when you're doing this. What we should be doing is saying, okay, That's what we want to motivate people to do. The subliminal message is this. So the subliminal message in the form of a company may be as simple as, this is a worthwhile investment. So then the whole report should be consolidating that, so people come to the conclusion that this company is a worthwhile investment. Not through them saying it's a worthwhile investment, from the way they actually present the information in the report as saying, these people know what they're doing. And it comes across most effectively the way you tackle the bad news. When you're doing any piece of corporate communication, you must be very careful about how you present the brand. The brand is one of the most powerful weapons a company has. For example, Qantas, McDonald's, Apple. The value of their brand is enormous. So the brand must be presented consistently throughout. You may have heard of Raymond Loewy. He was regarded as one of the world's greatest designers. And this young woman was talking to him and she said, Mr. Loewy, why have you got 2 X's in Exxon in that logo? And he said, why do you ask? And she said, I couldn't help but notice. He turned to her and he said, I think you've answered your own question. And the other thing I'd like to touch on here is comfort zones. You've got a corporate comfort zone which is tied up with the brand. So you must always conform to that. But sometimes there are personal comfort zones within a company that can get in the road of what you're doing. Now, many years ago, we were dealing with a large electrical company and we'd been doing their report for some time. And we were dealing with a manager within that company who was a very conservative person and he had a very personal comfort zone. So we were putting up all these beaut ideas and progressive ideas of how to present the report and get more impact in the report. And he was dumbing it down all the time. Eventually, his superiors came to him and said, we've got to change the designer. We need to have someone who's giving us something different. We're getting the same thing year after year. Now, this is what we should do. Look at all these designs. Look how progressive they are. And the only thing that saved us is that they were all our designs. And that's a clear message. When companies are looking for a new designer, they're looking sometimes for people with the new big idea. What is this big idea? The big idea is only of value if the big idea is related to a message that you want to get through. In the late 90s, BHP weren't travelling all that well and they were coming under a lot of flack from their shareholders and the community at large through the way they were running the company, the investments they were making. And at that stage, they just diversified into diamond mining. Now, instead of the report being a defensive conservative report, they took the bit between their teeth and they came up with a very, very bold presentation. Under pressure, coal becomes diamonds. Brilliant. Earlier I made the comment that in communicating, messages are far more important than words. Here's an example from a report that won the Communication Award several years ago of how that works. Oil Search had been around for many, many years, and quite a number of people were not quite clear on why they were so successful. So the challenge was to try and get that message across strongly and succinctly. And this is how it was done on some of the opening pages within that report. We make more profit per barrel of oil because we have fewer holes in the barrel. There are sufficient gas reserves in Papua New Guinea to power all of North Queensland's industry for more than 3 decades. We have forged a strong bond with the government and the people of Papua New Guinea. Take me back to the good old days when every third well was successful and 80% of the resource was still waiting to be found. For almost 70 years, we've been perfecting the art of operating in an environment that is strictly for the birds. And the final spread, wrapping all those spreads up, is the promise of the future. They wanted a cover that says achievement. And in searching for achievement, we wanted to find out what is the universal symbol of achievement. We thought about it for a while and we thought, well, perhaps the raising of the flag of Iwo Jima. And of course, that is so sacred with the Americans that we couldn't use that image on the front cover of the report, so we decided to recreate it. And that's what it looked like. Never underestimate the power of photography in getting a message across in corporate communications. Always surprises me that when some companies are doing their budgets, they budget for everything but photography. They simply just don't understand the value of the photography. To me, not putting a budget photography is about the same as not putting budget in for paper in a printed report. Photography should not be regarded as a form of dressing up a design. The photography should be there to tell a message. It should be an exercise in photojournalism. And it works very well. I've got a few examples here I'd like you to have a look at. After being known as a gold explorer, Great Central Mines wanted to let the public know that they were a gold producer. At the height of the era of bank bashing, a leading bank wanted to soften their image and get across the message that they were in fact listening. A finance company wanted to highlight the value of balanced risks. NRMA wanted to send out a very clear message that they were highly relevant to the young market. Corporate communication will only ever be as effective as the sum of its component parts. And if the components are not up to standard, then the corporate communication won't be up to standard. What do they say? Garbage in, garbage out. In the early days, you needed photography. But as the options increased, you also need motion pictures. Most of the leading design houses, when on photographic location, do stills and complementary videos. And now there are a number of applications available for the mobile phone, whereby if the report is produced the correct way, you can get the phone pointed at a still image, press the button, and you've got a movie on your phone. As effective as the electronic media is, never underestimate the continuing power of print, which continues to be more powerful as time goes by. It is not diminishing in any way at all. And when it comes to print, Australia is right up there with the best. In the 2012 American International Print Awards, an Australian printed product, which wasn't an annual report, won one of these. It's the Benny, which is the equivalent in the print industry to the Oscars in the film industry, and it was regarded as the best printed product in the world for 2012. It's something that Australia can be very, very proud of. For effective corporate communication, the focus should be on the message. The design should never draw attention to itself. It should not be regarded as embellishment. A good design will draw attention to the message and optimise the impact and effectiveness of the message. And never think that design can't improve the accounts in a piece of corporate communication. The fact that very rarely people do it doesn't mean it can't be done. I've heard someone say, no, it can't be done. What they're basically saying is that they can't do it. Politically correct is not always correct. Avoid being swayed by misinformation. For instance, what is the difference between plantation growth and cultivation of timber for paper than there is for growing wheat for human consumption? This is a subject that I can speak with great authority on because I did an extensive trip of the Nordic countries and witness firsthand of what's going on up there when we were actually developing background knowledge for sustainability reports. The Nordic countries regard their forests as national treasures. And despite harvesting of timber for paper, their forests are growing at 38%. Then you have people coming along and they say, let's use environmentally friendly paper, recycled paper in our corporate communication. The recycling plant is the filthiest plant known to man and is the only paper processing plant that can't get environmental accreditation. Then we have the story about power. Do you realise that one single sheet out of your laser printer uses as much energy as a 100-page annual report? I could go on and on and on breaking all these myths, but decisions have been made by this misinformation, and they shouldn't be. Never sacrifice value for cost. To be effective, you've got to get the value. Now, you can look at a number of costs. There is the total cost, there is the unit cost, but how many people look at the effective unit cost? The effective unit cost is the cost of the number of reports, for instance, that are actually read. So the unit cost and the total cost could be very, very misleading because you could save a lot of money, but if no one reads and the impact doesn't get through and the message doesn't get through, you've just wasted your money. The best suggestion I can make about budgets is never define your budget before you define your communication objectives. To do this, you're putting yourself in a straitjacket and losing a lot of opportunity. It's a little bit like walking into a shoe shop with a budget and walking out with one shoe. Define the task and then work out the most cost-effective way of fulfilling that task. And if you're looking for comparative prices between design houses, do it on the rates and the conditions. Today I've only touched on a very small tip in a giant iceberg. This discussion could go on for hour after hour after hour. There is so much involved in it. But boiled down, the important thing that I want to re-stress is treat your corporate communication as an opportunity to consolidate your shareholder base. And no matter what medium you use, whether it be print or whether it be online. There is a tendency amongst companies now not to speak to their shareholders, not to communicate to their shareholders and push them away. Be careful, because if you don't speak to them and if you push them away, they're going to push you away. Obligation or opportunity? We suggest you make the Q your motto. We've made it ours.